And if you were here 3 years ago when this reading came up, you probably heard this story from me. But Ben, he was so excited to start his school career. And the thing that he was the most looking forward to about starting school was finally being allowed to go on the bus with his big sister, Ellie. So on the first day of school, we drove him to school and got him settled into his class, but we decided that it would be okay for him to take the bus home with Ellie. So 3:30 comes around and I make my way up to the bus stop to wait for them to get home. Couldn't wait to hear all about the adventures of his first day. When the bus gets there, kids start getting off the bus. It's a little bit chaotic. And finally, Ellie appears in the doorway of the bus. And as she's walking down the stairs, she says, "Where's Ben, Daddy?" First day of school and the kid gets lost. Now at first I thought she was joking. I thought that maybe she was trying to pull a prank on her dad. But then I remembered she was only 6 years old and probably wasn't going to come up with a joke like that. And so I was on that bus in a flash, searching for Ben in the midst of a sea of little faces. But Ben, he wasn't on the bus. Just when panic was really starting to set in, a voice came over the radio that said, "I've got a little guy on bus number 3 that's not supposed to be here. Anyone missing a kid?" I didn't know if that was Ben or not, but I said, "I don't care who it is, I'm taking that kid home with me." But here's the thing. What if Ben hadn't have been found as quickly as he was? What if I was left standing on that bus and had absolutely no clue where my little guy was? Would I have left my 6-year-old daughter, Ellie, would I have left her standing on the side of the road and rushed off in search of Ben? Probably not. But that's exactly what happens in that parable that Jesus tells the sinners and the tax collectors who have come to hear him speak. Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness, which basically means which one of you wouldn't leave them in the wilderness surrounded by all kinds of danger? Which one of you would not leave them in that place of danger and go and search for the one that is lost? Probably not me. But I think that is Jesus' way of trying to tell us how precious, utterly precious, each and every one of us are to God. That God loves each one of us so fully and so completely that God is willing to do whatever it takes. God is willing to risk absolutely everything in order to search for us when we are feeling lost. And that extravagant love, it is for absolutely everyone. Even the sinners, even the tax collectors. Now let me tell you a little bit about tax collectors. I want to tell you a little bit about the tax collectors in Jesus' day. Because these are not your typical Revenue Canada employees. Because we've got a few of those kicking around here. And while some of them might be considered to be a little bit weird, and some might tell some pretty bad jokes sometimes, Andy Suga, the tax collectors in Jesus' day are a breed of their own. These are Jewish men. These are Jews who have been recruited by the Roman Empire to go and collect tax from their neighbors. They were sent to collect the tax from their neighbors that then went to support the ongoing occupation and oppression of Israel by the Romans. They collected money from their neighbors in order to fund their own oppression. And if that wasn't bad enough, these tax collectors, they were given a quota by the Romans. Here's how much you have to collect every single week. But if they exceeded that quota, that is, the more that they could squeeze out of their neighbors above the quota set by the Romans, the richer they would become. So naturally, these guys were not all that popular. They were considered to be cheats. They were traitors. They were not loyal, and they were completely and utterly considered to be unrighteous. They were shunned by their Jewish brothers and sisters. But Jesus says, God's extravagant love is for them. That if a tax collector has lost his way, and obviously these guys had really and truly lost their way, Jesus is telling them that God loves them enough to search for them and bring them home. The thing is, Jesus is saying that our God loves us at our worst. Our God loves us at our absolute lowest, so that in response to that love, we might grow to become what God created us to be. As for the sinners, we often make reference to the fact that we are all sinners. And while that's true, that's not what Luke meant when he used that word. Luke's theology was not shaped by what ours has been shaped by in what is called the doctrine of original sin. Luke's theology is not shaped by that understanding. When Luke says that the sinners were coming to hear what Jesus had to say, he is using that word to describe people who stood so far outside the pale of decent and acceptable behavior that they were completely and utterly shunned and judged as unworthy. When people looked at them, they thought, you don't deserve anything. When people looked at them, these were people who were rejected and completely ostracized. And yet Jesus says, even to the likes of them, God loves you. God loves you enough to risk everything to search for you when you are lost. Because again, God loves us when we are at our worst, and God loves us when we are at our lowest. And so, in response to that love, we might have the time to grow into being God's best, what God created us to be. Now, when someone we love has lost something that is precious to them, and they are searching everywhere for it. Think of a time when someone in your family has been searching and turning the house upside down, desperately trying to find something that they've lost. How do we typically respond to that? We try to help, right? We help them search for what it is they have lost. What is precious to them becomes precious to us because of our love for them. I remember my sister, she had this necklace that she absolutely loved. This necklace, it meant absolutely nothing to me, but it was really and truly special to her. One day she lost it. It fell down the crack between the wall and the sink in the bathroom at our house. She knew where it was, but it was lost because she could not get it. All of a sudden in that situation, something that had previously held no value, something that had no significance for me, something I had never even really thought of before, all of a sudden that necklace became a priority for me. because I knew how important it was for my sister. I knew how much she loved that necklace. And so I searched for it. I spent 2 hours one afternoon with a metal coat hanger, sticking the coat hanger down between the wall and the crack beside the sink, and I finally hooked it on and got that necklace back. And when I presented it to her, there was so much joy for her in receiving what she had lost back. As followers of Jesus, what is precious to God becomes precious to us. And in today's gospel, Jesus says that sinners and tax collectors are precious to God. The most broken and the most vulnerable in our midst are loved by God. That those who our society shuns or ignores, they are loved by God. That the homeless and those living in poverty, absolutely and utterly loved by God. That the sick and the mentally ill are loved by God. That the immigrants and refugees that the world around us is so busy building walls to keep out, they are loved utterly by God. That the LGBTQ2 community that the Anglican Church has been wrestling with over the past 1,000,000 years, Jesus is saying, absolutely and utterly loved by God. That all those the world hates and condemns are loved by God. That all these people are loved by God so much that God will risk everything to search for them when they are lost. And as followers in the way of Jesus, we are called to live our lives with the heart of God. To let what is precious in God's eyes become precious in ours. This really is what makes being a follower of Jesus Christ such a counter-cultural way to live our lives. To live differently than the world around you. To have the courage to hold different beliefs and different priorities. To love and care for those the world chooses not to love. It was the sinners and the tax collectors who were going out to hear what Jesus had to say. And it's not hard to figure out why they were attracted to Jesus. He was describing for them a new world. A world where everyone is welcome. A world where power and status and social stigma are no more. A world where God risks everything to set right all of the injustices that people experience in their lives. Healing the sick, feeding the hungry, freeing the imprisoned, providing for the poor. It is not hard to see why the sinners and tax collectors love Jesus so much. There's an Anglican priest who is currently serving in a cathedral in a city somewhere in Canada where homelessness is a major concern. And during the summer months, people began to set up tents on the cathedral grounds in order to have a place to lay their head at night. Now, this brought with it things that tend to accompany homelessness: drug abuse, mental illness, drunkenness, public urination. And yet this priest chose not to send these people away. But he decided to risk everything in order to give them an expression of God's love, to be an expression of God's care and concern for them. And it cost this priest a whole lot of verbal abuse over the summer months, because the local community around that cathedral was absolutely up in arms about it. Even some members of the congregation were saying, what a disgrace this is to our cathedral church to be allowing this to happen. They were enraged by this, and they demanded that he send these people away. Use the air quote, these people away. And the reason why they wanted to send these people away is because ultimately people who are living on the streets, people who are homeless, people who are really struggling in their lives, they were not precious to those people who wanted to send them away in the same way that they are precious to God. Even in our own city of London, we have people sleeping on the cathedral grounds downtown this summer. Homelessness is a major concern that needs to be addressed in our city. Poverty and housing is a major concern that needs to be addressed in our city. And while allowing people to camp out on the cathedral grounds is never going to be a permanent solution, it is an expression of God's love for us to welcome them and to see their worth and to see their value as God does. We are called to love others at their worst and at their lowest, so that they might, in response to that love, grow to become God's best. We have a federal election coming up in October. And while I would never in a million years presume to stand up here and tell you which party you should be voting for, I do have an opinion if you want to talk to me privately. While I will not tell you which party to vote for, I would encourage each and every one of you to make sure that you make your decision as a follower of Jesus Christ. Let being a follower of Jesus inform how you cast your ballot. In the weeks to come, prayerfully reflect on which party or which candidate appears to be willing to address the needs and the concerns of the most vulnerable in our midst. Which party is willing to risk everything in order to be that expression of God's love? The promises that you made at your baptism should influence how you vote in this election. Which political party is striving for justice and peace among all people? Which party seeks to serve the needs of all people? Which party seeks to respect the dignity of every human being, regardless of race, or where they come from, or what they believe, or what their sexual orientation might be? Which party or which candidate sees as precious those who God sees as precious, and is willing to risk everything just as Jesus did, even dying on a cross, to show us that we are all worthy of care and concern and of dignity and love. All of us, sinners and tax collectors included. And may this place here at St. Jude's, may this always be a place where people can come at their worst and their lowest and know that they are loved. May this be a place where they can always come at their worst and lowest and grow in the love that surrounds them and become the people that God created them to be. Just like each one of us continues to grow and become the people we are created to be because of God's love for us. Amen.